this has been great so far. You have given such an eye-opening, fantastic way to start thinking about time management, and I think this is going to be essential for some people. Let's help some people with some things they can try today. So what are some techniques that professionals or job seekers even can try so they can be more effective with your time?
Absolutely. So one technique that I really like because it's pretty easy to implement and it's really going to bring to the forefront what your distractions are and where the challenges of staying focused are. But it's simple enough to really try it out and be successful as well. But also scalable so you can extend it to longer periods of time. It's called the Pomodoro Technique. And the reason it's called the Pomodoro Technique is because it was invented by an Italian, and Pomodoro means tomato in Italian. And he would use one of those old kitchen timers that was in the shape of a tomato. And you would, you can turn it to however many minutes. And then when the timer goes off, it's like this really loud bell.
Yeah.
So that's the history of the name. But the technique itself is the technique itself is the technique itself is that you have sprints of focus followed by a break. And you have several sprint, short break, sprint, short break, sprint, short break, and then you have a longer break. And so that's the premise behind it, is that our brains are able to stay focused for certain amounts of time. I believe that the original Pomodoro formula is 20 minutes, 5 minutes, or maybe it's 20 minutes, 5 minutes, 20 minutes, 5 minutes. And you do that for 3 sprints, and then you take a solid 15-minute break.
15-minute break. Okay.
And during that break, you do not work. You step away. You do something completely different. You let your brain relax. You get distracted by all the notifications. You reward yourself with, diving into whatever it was that you were tempted to dive into, whether that's email or social media or watching something or whatever it is. And then you go back to focus time, and you go back to sprint, short break, sprint, short break. The thing about Pomodoro Technique is you have to figure out the duration of those sprints for yourself, because it's going to really, the more you customize it, the more you figure out what's best for you, the more effective it'll be. So for some people, that's going to be 15-minute sprints. For some people, that's going to be 25-minute sprints. I've worked with clients who say, no, I really need 45 minutes because my work requires so much, it takes me so much time to even get into this creative space or whatnot. And I don't want to interrupt it. And when the alarm goes off, I get stressed out because I'm not done. I'm in the middle of it. Cool. Then keep going, but figure out what that sprint is. But it is really important to have those little 5-minute breaks in between the sprints. And if your sprints end up being longer, to have longer breaks so that you're allowing your brain to recharge and you're not exhausted by the end of the day.
Yeah, it's funny because when you first gave that presentation over at Capital Factory, that was one of the things that I actually implemented. And still to this day, I use my phone actually. So I have a timer on my phone, and I hit the start stop. And what you said, it just rings so true about the length of time varies per person, because I tried the 20 minutes, and for some tasks it does work really well. For instance, if I'm answering emails and I can work in kind of the micro, so to speak, 20 minutes works great. So I'll start, stop. But if I'm working, and this is just me, I'm not saying for everyone to do this, but if I'm working in more deep projects that may take 3 to 5 minutes to get my brain warmed up to some math formula or something like that, then my sprints need to be a little bit longer. So 40 minutes works great for me sometimes. So I'll do the 40-minute, 5-minute break, 40-minute, 5-minute break. And I've been doing 15 minutes consistently. So you're saying the 15-minute long break it's pretty good?
Yeah. 15 minutes is a solid amount of time to just step away and refresh.
Yeah. But would you say that it may make sense to start decreasing the time that you have during these sprints as your day gets longer? Because I get tired towards the end of the day, but.
that's again going back to energy management and time management really going together. Yeah. So then when you're starting to hit that slump, you either adjust what you're doing to match your energy level. So whether that means making the sprint shorter, or you figure out what re-energizes you and you go do that.
Okay. And how many of these sprints should I be doing per day? Is it endless, or is there an actual number?
There's not an actual number. It really depends on what you're doing and how you're doing it. So, and most people have some meetings throughout the day as well. And that's not really a sprint. That's a meeting. So it's a different mindset. But I think it's really dependent on what's working for you. And if the Pomodoro Technique is something that is really keeping you focused, that's awesome. I have a client who finds, and this is very human and very true for a lot of us, but really needs accountability to really start getting things done, and has been it's really challenging for a lot of people to be outside of a physical office right now, and to be working remotely, working from home can be challenging because you have a little bit less accountability. You don't have your coworkers around you being productive and that kind of influencing and inspiring your own productivity. You have to self-generate it. So I have a client who's been working from home and adjusting to it, and decided to create host some virtual co-working over Zoom, and just invite people to join in and do these sprints together. So so it'll be carve out, whether it's an hour or 3 hours, and at the top of it, everyone says, all right, and I'm going to use this time for X. And by the end of this time period, I want to get to this point of, completing X.
Oh my gosh.
And it's really cool because there's that group accountability factor. And even though no one's really talking, everyone's just has, Zoom on the background and people are just watching each other work. It's highly productive because there's that accountability factor.
That's fantastic. And also just a really creative way to, during this time, hold each other accountable, because it's been tough. We had another, it was a work strategies from home podcast. And I told this person, Jackie Mitchell, how hard it was for me to work by myself. So that is a really cool idea. All right. So what is another technique that we can use today to manage our time better?
Yeah. So another technique that I love to introduce and to share as a concept of prioritization is the urgent important matrix. It's also known as the Eisenhower matrix. Eisenhower apparently used this a lot. I first heard about it through Stephen Covey and the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, which is a great book.
Great book. Jinx. Yes. It is so awesome. My brother's reading it now. I've only read select chapters, but it's time to actually break it out and do a full read through. But that's I've heard so many things about that book.
Yeah, it's a book that I've read and reread, and there's always something more or something to be reminded of. Oh yeah, yes, that's right. So the urgent important matrix is essentially you draw a grid and you have 4 quadrants, and on the left side you've got urgent or not urgent, and then you've got important or not important, and so you have things that are urgent and important. You have things that are urgent but not important. The distinction between urgent and important is really oftentimes things that are urgent, or the urgency is external. Sometimes, not always, but sometimes if someone says this is urgent, it might not necessarily be urgent to you, but it is urgent contextually. And important are often the things that that we know are going to make a big difference and we know are going to lead to big progress, but they tend to be more of the project things and the things that take a little bit more focus, that are easy to set aside because urgent has so much more charge.
Right. Exactly. Like that email that you've just received right now from someone who wants an answer now versus that big project that you know is going to drive yourself forward or drive your company forward, but it's just going to take some time and there may not be that pressing deadline.
Exactly. Yeah. So in the first quadrant, important and urgent, these are immediate deadlines, things that are important. There is some kind of time factor that's involved in it. Important but not urgent are the long-term strategies and goals. These are the things that we put off most frequently because they are long-term, so they don't have that that intensity. So it's like, oh well, I'll work on that tomorrow, and then that becomes tomorrow is always tomorrow. The urgent but not important, those things are time pressured. They're often, as we talked about, they're the external time of that urgent email, like I need this. And then you've got not important and not urgent. So these are distractions. These are procrastinations. These are the the alerts or the number of likes or whatever it is, right?
Yeah, or random sales emails that sell a product you really don't want.
That too. Yep. So one thing that's really interesting to do is to look at this matrix and map out. There's two ways that I recommend starting to use this matrix. One is take what you're doing now, do a retrospective on your past week. And for each day of that week, look back at your to-do list or just in your memory. What did you do that day and which quadrant was it in? And kind of see where have you been spending most of your time? Which quadrants are you hanging out in most frequently? And then that'll give you some data, and again, it's very common that we spend the least amount of time in important but not urgent, the long-term strategy, and very often we spend a lot of time in quadrants 3 and 4 with the time pressured external things and the distractions and the procrastinations, and then a good amount of time in kind of the immediate important deadlines, right?
That is so huge.
Yeah. So you'll definitely collect some data. You'll kind of notice, but don't be self-critical or judgmental. Just notice. It's a data point. And what you do with that data point is more interesting than the data itself, because that's in the past. What's more interesting is what do you want to do about it now that it's on the surface?
Yeah.
And so what you can do is start planning out your next day and eventually your next week based on what quadrants you want to be spending more time in or less time in, and just start experimenting. What would it look like to really commit to spending an hour in quadrant 2? And what is that specific thing that's important but not urgent? And how are you going to commit to doing it even though it lacks the urgency? Because it is a long-term goal. It is something that you say you want to do and you've been saying you want to do, but what do you need to do to commit to being in that quadrant to move the thing forward?
I love that. And I want to bring up a specific example of something that has helped me, because I don't know whether it was the voice of you in the past that really got to me or just something that happened in parallel. But I have been spending a lot of time on urgent versus important and kind of having this self-awareness. And one thing that I've always wanted to make happen was just to have a podcast that gets better and better, like that has more relevant content that just continues to help more and more job seekers. So I would put that in the important quadrant, but not necessarily important, urgent, because the podcast seems to be doing fine. People are getting value from it. They're happy. But in the rather urgent quadrant, and I would put this under important as well, I had the issue of having having to edit podcasts, which let's edit out that part because I'm coughing. coughing. I've had like that task to do, and it's so urgent because I have to get these podcasts out on Mondays and Thursdays. So for me, being able to look at that urgency and saying, how can I find a way to either automate that or delegate it, has helped me tremendously. So I found a podcast editor. This person is helping me so that way I can focus more time on what's important, which is to help move the needle on this podcast content. So I can't emphasize enough how much I believe in what you're saying. I just think it's so powerful.
Yeah. And you bring up such a good point, Chris, in terms of sometimes we try to do it all ourselves, and part of time management is assessing what can you let go of. So in your case, you were able to bring someone on board to take things off your plate. And so delegation is such a huge part of time management, figuring out how you can either automate or delegate or just eliminate.
Eliminate. I love that.
Certain things you're doing that you don't need to be doing.
I love that.